The day my mother-in-law threw Ethan's old laptop into the trash, she said one cold sentence. That silly project had no value. They kept the money from selling that project. The money my husband said was meant for me and our son. I thought all I could do was cry, until his IT guy from work knocked on my door, handed me a hard drive, and whispered, he backed everything up. You need to see this. My name is Laura. I'm 58. I live in a small Midwestern town where the wind whips around old wooden roofs in the winter, and in the summer people sit on their front steps with iced tea, watching each other go to work and the grocery store. I'm not a tech person. I work part-time in a small office, used to paper files, forms, and repeating numbers. Nothing like the blinking green and red code on Ethan's screen, but I knew every wrinkle on his forehead. Every night he stayed up late with that laptop my mother-in-law called a pile of junk, and every sentence he whispered about the project they said had no value. Ethan was a few years older than me, a quiet, gentle software engineer. We'd been married for over 20 years, living in a small house with a creaky wooden porch, paying down the mortgage a little at a time with his salary and my extra shifts. Our son, Ben, had just gone off to college. Every time Ethan watched him walk out the door with his backpack, he'd sigh in relief and say, if we can just get him through school, then I can finally think about retiring. About 2 years before he died, Ethan started working on a side project, a little tool, as he called it, software some companies used internally. He built it with a few buddies, bit by bit. At first, nobody thought it would go anywhere, but slowly, more people used it, word spread, and then a bigger company emailed saying they wanted to acquire it. That night, Ethan sat at the dining table, hands still damp from washing dishes, eyes shining like a kid just out of college. Laura, he said, voice low but shaking, if this deal goes through, we can pay off the mortgage and get Ben through 4 years of college. I told them if anything happens to me, my share needs to go to you and Ben. I wrote a memo. There are emails. I'm not leaving you out there begging anyone for anything. I didn't understand all the words he used. Equity, payout, cap table. But I understood one thing. He saw me as his partner, not just the wife in the kitchen. Whenever he opened the laptop, I'd bring him another cup of coffee, sit opposite folding laundry, listening to him mumble about bugs and builds. Sometimes he'd turn and grin. If the money ever hits, I'll print the email and frame it for you in the kitchen so you actually believe it's real. His side of the family did not see it that way. My in-laws, Robert and Margaret, are in their 70s, the kind of people who believe men handle money and women handle the stove. In their eyes, Ethan's job was sitting there typing, and the side project was just some nerd game. They never asked if I had any input. They only asked how much he made and whether he remembered his real family, meaning them. Our son is very smart, Margaret would say, patting Ethan on the shoulder. Don't let your wife talk you into anything stupid. Business is for men. I got used to comments like that. I wouldn't argue, just pour more coffee and clear more plates. Every time she said it, Ethan would squeeze my hand under the table, like he was apologizing on their behalf. Then, one October morning, when the maple leaves out front had just started turning red, Ethan collapsed in the garage on his way to work. A stroke hit him faster than any line of code he'd ever written. When I ran out there, his hand was still clenched around the car keys, his mouth halfway through the sentence, "I'll be home early tonight." The ambulance came, lights flashing across our little street, but there are some things that once they snap, no system can restart. The funeral happened fast, the way people rush through anything too painful to look at. I signed forms at the funeral home, answered questions about insurance and burial plots. During those days, Robert and Margaret blew in like a storm. They hugged me, sobbed loudly, and then very quickly changed the subject to Ethan's paperwork, accounts, and unfinished business. "Don't worry about any of that," Robert said in that voice of his that sounded used to giving orders. "We'll handle his job, the bank, everything. You just focus on Ben and yourself. Business is for older men who understand the law, not widows." "You all know what it says." An older lawyer with white hair, one of Robert's old friends, showed up in my living room carrying the smell of old cologne and a shiny leather briefcase. He shook my hand, offered practiced condolences, then spent hours in the corner with my in-laws, spreading out papers. I caught words like estate, LLC, and consulting agreement. But the real talking was done away from me. "We'll take care of it," the lawyer, Collins, smiled. "You just trust your husband's family." That night, sitting alone in the kitchen with the smell of funeral flowers still hanging in the air, I remembered something Ethan had said not long before. "I put everything in the computer, in the emails. If something happens, you'll know what to do." His laptop was still in his little office, which my in-laws now said needed to be cleared out. I had no idea that within days the machine he'd spent countless nights typing on would be lying at the bottom of a trash bin like a broken toaster, and I had no idea that the last thin thread tying me to his life's work would end up on a tiny hard drive in the hands of a nervous it kid standing at my front door. I still remember the morning Ethan's laptop disappeared, down to the shine of its metal under the trash lid. It was a Saturday. I got up earlier than usual. After weeks of guests, paperwork, and grief, I was exhausted. I made a pot of coffee and was about to sit on the porch for some air when I noticed Ethan's office door ajar. I heard rustling, the scrape of something heavy sliding on the desk. "Margaret!" I called, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What are you doing?" My mother-in-law stood with her back to me, grey hair pinned in a bun, wearing an old beige sweater. In her hands was Ethan's laptop, the grey one he'd typed on until the A key and Enter key were shiny and worn. "Oh, I'm just clearing out some of this clutter," she said without turning around. "He's gone now. All this stuff just keeps you stuck." My heart jumped. "That's his laptop, Mum. I want to keep it. There's still a lot in there." She turned, looking at me over her reading glasses. Her eyes weren't cruel exactly, but they were cold. "What are you going to do with this? Stare at it all day? If there was anything valuable in it, his company would have taken it. Those silly little projects of his. Nobody pays real money for that." My throat tightened. But he said, "There are documents in there, emails about the project. The deal was still—" "He told me." She sighed, irritation creeping into her voice. "Laura, you have to let go. He's dead. We can't keep clinging to files and code. His father and the lawyer are handling any business you need to focus on Ben and on yourself. Holding on to this machine won't bring him back." Before I could answer, she tucked the laptop under her arm and walked straight out to the garage. I followed her. She lifted the lid of the big blue trash bin. The smell of garbage and damp cardboard rose up. She raised the laptop high and let it drop. The sound of metal hitting plastic echoed in the garage like an empty bell. "Mum!" I shouted. I rushed forward to reach in, but she blocked me. "Don't," she said sharply. "You're just torturing yourself. Anything important is already being handled. You keep imagining this thing is some kind of treasure chest. It's just a hunk of metal that keeps you from accepting the truth. He's gone." I froze. All the nights I'd seen Ethan hunched over that machine flashed through my mind. The night he opened the first email about the acquisition offer, hands shaking. The night he joked about framing the email for me. The night he said, "If anything happens, you'll open the computer and you'll know what to do." Now it was under yogurt cups, greasy pizza boxes from the funeral guests, and crumpled tissues. I didn't have the strength to stand there fighting my mother-in-law over a trash can. I just turned away, feeling hollow, like the garage she'd just cleaned. About 2 weeks after the funeral, Robert invited me and Ben over for a family dinner. Margaret roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, the whole proper American spread. I forced myself to swallow a few bites. Everything tasted like cardboard. Robert cleared his throat and put his fork down. "Laura, we met with Collins. He's looked at Ethan's old will, the life insurance, the accounts. Things are pretty clear. You've got the insurance, the house is in your name, and there are some savings. That's all settled." "What about his project?" I asked, my fingers tightening around my glass. "That tool he was building on the side. He said the deal was close. A company wanted to buy it." Margaret shrugged. Oh, that. Our son was always dreaming about little side projects. If anything serious came from it, he would have told us. I glanced at Ben. He looked back at me, eyes wide. We both remembered what Ethan had said in that kitchen. Robert cut in, voice edging toward annoyance. Actually, a company did reach out. But Laura, you have to understand something. This was a consulting thing between me and Ethan. I lent him money when he started. He had an LLC with me, so taxes would be easier. He told me if anything came of it, it was to pay us back first. You shouldn't expect much from that. But he told me, if the deal came through, his share would take care of me and Ben, I said, trying to stay calm. He said he wrote a memo, sent emails. Collins dabbed his lips with his napkin, then spoke in that smooth, flat tone of his. I've seen some of the emails Robert shared. Most are technical, a few casual lines about taking care of my wife and son. Legally, we don't base decisions on things said over dinner, Mrs. Parker. So it has no weight? I asked. Not exactly, he shrugged, but if this deal even produced money, it would be income of the father-son LLC. Were Ethan alive, he could share it with you. Now that he's gone, things land in a grey area. The important thing is, your in-laws are already taking care of you with the house and insurance. Don't let hypothetical money complicate your grief. Margaret nodded as if that settled everything. Listen to the lawyer. I know you're hurting, but don't turn yourself into the kind of woman who clings to a dead man's money. That line hit me like a slap. I sat there in silence, feeling ashamed and angry all at once. I'd never thought of myself as greedy, but the way they talked made me feel like I was being cast as the grabby widow in their story. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Words spun around in my head. Grey area, father-son, no real value. I kept seeing the laptop hitting the bottom of the trash bin. If the contracts were in there, the memo, the emails, it all felt like it had been crushed along with the cardboard and trash. I turned toward Ethan's empty side of the bed and whispered into the dark. I tried to trust your parents. Why does everything feel wrong? The answer came from Ben, not from Ethan. One afternoon, I was doing dishes when Ben rushed in from the living room, clutching Ethan's old iPad, his face pale. Mom, he said, voice shaking, I just found something. What is it? I set down the plate and wiped my hands. Dad's email, he swallowed it. The iPad was still logged in somehow. There's an email from a company called Millstone Systems. They said they finished sending the acquisition payment for his project. Mum, they already paid. My heart dropped. Show me. We sat at the table. On the iPad screen was the email. Dear Ethan Parker, we're confirming that the acquisition payment for the internal tool project has been processed. Total amount, $. Funds have been wired to the account of Parker and Son Consulting LLC as per your last instructions. Parker and Son Consulting? I read, my throat tightening. He never told me about this LLC. Ben scrolled. Look at this. Under that thread was another, from Millstone's legal team. We just want to make sure your estate and spouse are fully aware of this payout structure should anything happen to you. And a reply from Robert's email address. I am handling Ethan's estate as his father and business partner. His wife is taken care of through insurance and their home. This was a father-son consulting matter. I stared at those lines, my eyes burning. His wife is taken care of. And father-son matter. Mum, Ben whispered. Grandpa said the deal wasn't done yet. But this is proof the money already went through, right? I nodded, but my tongue felt thick. Cold sweat ran down my back. Dad never told me he saw Grandpa as his main partner either, Ben went on. He said the project was his team's, and that his share, if anything happened, would be for you and me. I remember that. I stood up, clutching the iPad like a hot brick. I was shaking all over, but my mind felt strangely clear. I realized Ethan's laptop was gone, the paper contracts weren't in the house, and his old will didn't mention the project. But part of the truth had floated to the surface through this old iPad. Nobody had bothered to wipe it. Tonight, I said slowly, I'm going to talk to your grandparents. Excuse, I'll never forget that confrontation. We went over to my in-laws' house on a weekend evening. Margaret opened the door with a thin smile. "You two just stopping by to visit? We need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than usual, "about Ethan's project." In the living room, Robert muted the TV. Financial news flickered silently on the screen behind him. He turned and looked at us. "What's with the serious faces?" he asked. I set the iPad gently on the coffee table. "I read Ethan's emails. I know Millstone Systems already transferred the acquisition money to Parker & Son Consulting LLC. I saw their email to you about his estate. I want to know, how much was that payout, and why wasn't I told clearly?" Robert's expression changed. The polite smile vanished. "Laura, I've explained this. That was business between father and son. I lent him money when he started. He set up the LLC with me. He wanted that money to pay his parents back. You have the insurance, the house. That's enough." "No," I said quietly, cutting him off for the first time. "That's not the whole story. Ethan talked about that project for 2 years. He said if the deal went through, he'd pay off our mortgage and cover Ben's college. He told me he'd written things down, so if something happened, his share would go to me and Ben. Maybe he formed an LLC with you, but that doesn't automatically erase us." Margaret jumped in, her face hardening. "What do you want? Every last penny from us. That money is to pay back old debts and help us in our old age. You've been given plenty already, Laura." Ben stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "We just want the truth. Grandpa, Grandma, this is the project Dad stayed up all night working on. He hoped it would change our future. At the very least, I deserve to know what he actually promised." Robert slapped his palm on the arm of his chair. "I've told you, he's my son. He had every right to decide his work would help his parents. You came into his life later. Now you want to rewrite what he wanted." I opened the email and pointed to the line. "His wife is taken care of through insurance. Father-son matter. This makes it sound like you told them I had nothing to do with any of it," I said, "like I should be kept out of the loop." "That's just how you talk to business people," he waved a hand. "Colin said that was the best way. If you don't understand, don't dig." Margaret crossed her arms, eyes blazing. "Laura, you keep pushing. You're going to tear this family apart. What will people think if they hear you dragged your husband's elderly parents into court for some money he gave them? In my own head, 2 voices started arguing. One whispered, "Let it go. You can't take another war. Be quiet and live with what you've got." The other, smaller but stronger, said, "Ethan trusted you. He wrote things down. He backed them up. Walking away now is the same as calling him a liar." I clutched the iPad to my chest. "If this is all just a misunderstanding, then show me the bank statements for the LLC, the contract, anything Ethan signed that backs up what you're saying. If everything lines up, I'll apologize and drop it." They glanced at each other. Margaret gave a cold little laugh. "You don't get to demand that. You're forgetting your place." In that moment, I knew talking wouldn't solve this. I stood up and took Ben's hand. "Let's go," I said. "I need someone who doesn't share the Parker last name to look at this." 2 days later, Jared knocked on my door. I was wiping down the kitchen table when I heard a soft knock, then the doorbell. When I opened the door, I saw a guy in his early 30s, short hair, glasses, hoodie and jeans. Not a lawyer or banker, more like the co-workers Ethan used to talk about. "Are you Mrs. Parker?" he asked awkwardly. "Yes, and you are?" "I'm Jared. I'm in IT DevOps at the company Ethan worked for," he said slowly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come. I had to talk to my boss, to legal. Before I did this, I brought you something." He raised a small black external hard drive in one shaky hand. I froze. My heart started pounding like the day I watched that laptop fall into the trash. "Is that a backup?" Jared said. "Ethan was extremely careful. A few months before the Millstone deal got serious, He asked me to set up an offline backup for his important documents, not code, but emails, contracts, memos. He said, if anything happens to me, Laura is going to need these more than anyone else. It felt like someone squeezed my chest and then let go. My eyes burned. But his laptop, I stammered. My mother-in-law threw it away. Jared nodded. I heard. Somebody from work mentioned someone in the family called his project worthless and said his laptop was just junk. When I heard that, I knew I couldn't just stay quiet. This drive is not from the laptop. It's a separate backup I set up, synced from his work email and cloud. The passphrase is a sentence he said only you would know. I invited Jared in, still gripping the drive like it might vanish. He sat at the table, took off his beanie, and looked around my worn little kitchen. He talked about you a lot, Jared said with a sad smile. He used to say, my wife doesn't get the code, but she gets everything else that matters. You and Ben were his reason for pushing through. I bit my lip, unable to speak. Ben came downstairs and recognized Jared. We met at that company cookout, he said. Yeah, Jared nodded. I feel like this is something Ethan wanted me to do. That night we sat around the old kitchen table, me, Ben, and Jared. The tiny hard drive lay between us, small but strangely heavy. I pulled out my own laptop, the plain one I only ever used for email, pay stubs, and cooking videos. For the first time, it felt like a lifeline. You said the passphrase is something only Mum knows, Ben asked. Jared nodded. I don't know what it is. He just said it was a line only you would recognize, probably a phrase or a song lyric. I didn't try to guess. That's between you two. I took a deep breath. Memories of little private phrases between me and Ethan floated up. Finally, I typed, Blue house, always you. The sentence he wrote on the card that came with the house keys when we moved in. Our blue house, always you. The screen spun for a few seconds, then a list of folders appeared. There was a folder named Millstone, one named Contracts, one named Laura_Ben, and a single PDF labelled Partnership_Declaration_Laura Parker PDF. I hovered the cursor over it, afraid that if I clicked, it would disappear. Ben held his breath. Jared folded his hands, staring at the screen. Start with that one, Ben whispered. I opened it. Words filled the screen, not hearsay, not he once said, but actual text. Partnership Declaration, Laura Parker Ports, Ethan Parker, hereby declare that my wife, Laura Parker, is my financial partner in the internal tool project, currently under negotiation with Millstone Systems. It is my intention that in the event of my death or incapacitation, any and all proceeds, equity or payout attributed to my share of this project shall pass to her and our son, Ben Parker. I read every line, every my wife, partner, pass to her and our son, my hands shaking so hard the screen trembled. At the bottom was Ethan's signature with a clear date. There was a line, CC Jared Thompson, Mike Alvarez, likely co-workers, showing he hadn't just written this for himself. There was a small note he'd scanned in his own handwriting. Because she stayed up with me for every late night, this is hers too. Tears spilled down my cheeks, dropping onto the keyboard. I covered my mouth so I wouldn't sob out loud. Jared nodded, eyes misting. The night he sent that, he pinged me. Just in case my parents make this messy, I want at least 2 other people to have a copy. I didn't think it would be this soon. Ben squeezed my shoulder. Mum, Dad told the truth. He meant it. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and opened the next folder. Millstone. Inside were email chains. Ethan asking Millstone's legal team how his share would be handled if he died before full payout. Their answer very clear. The payout owed to Ethan would go to his estate under state law, unless a different written agreement existed. Ethan forwarding the draft contract to Robert and Collins, writing, I want to make sure Laura is listed next to me on anything related to the payout. Can you help me figure out the cleanest legal way to do this? Collins's reply was vague. We'll see what's simplest for taxes. Setting up a father-son LLC might be best. I'll talk it over with your dad. No mention of me. In contracts, we saw the final acquisition agreement. Ethan was listed as founding developer, one clause read, in the event of the death of Ethan Parker prior to full payout, any remaining sums payable shall be made to his estate. That means legally, his share should go to Dad's estate, then from there to you and me according to state law, Ben said, voice cracking. Not straight into Grandpa's LLC like we don't exist. Exactly, Jared said. I'm not a lawyer, but that part's very clear. Our legal team wanted to be sure his spouse knew, that's why they emailed about his estate in the first place. There were more emails after Ethan died, between Robert, Collins and Millstone, things I never would have seen without that backup Robert wrote. We prefer to keep this simple and off Laura's plate. She's emotionally not in a place to handle business. Please communicate payout details directly with me as the managing member of the LLC. Millstone's legal team replied, just to confirm, has Ethan's spouse been informed that his equity will be paid through this LLC structure? Collins answered for Robert. She is fully taken care of through life insurance and family assets. This project predates any recent changes and is being handled as a father-son consulting matter. I finished reading and felt a chill run through me. They hadn't just forgotten me, they'd actively written me out. Ben gripped my hand, Mum. I took a slow breath, swallowing the tears back. Jared, why did you bring this to me? You know this could drag you and the company into mess. He shook his head. Ethan was the first one at work to push back about overtime and unfair workloads. He stood up for us younger guys. When I heard someone in his family say the project was worthless, then saw him being turned into a father-son consulting deal, it felt wrong. He never once called it that to us. He always said, I'm doing this so my wife doesn't have to count every penny. I don't want to go against his parents, Jared went on, his voice catching. But I think this is what Ethan wanted. For you to have the truth, what you do with it, that's up to you. That night after Jared left, I sat alone in the kitchen. The hard drive lay next to me, laptop shut, the stove cold, our wedding photo on the wall and a stack of unpaid utility bills on the counter. I felt like I was standing on a wooden bridge. One side was the Parker family, the other side was the words Ethan left behind. Ben sat down with a mug of hot cocoa. Mum, what are we going to do? I sighed. I don't want to drag your grandparents through the mud, but I also can't pretend I never saw what your father wrote. If I stay quiet, it's like I'm saying he was wrong to trust me, and I know he wasn't. I don't want Dad to be remembered as a man who left a worthless project that Grandpa nobly took on, Ben said quietly. He wanted us to be okay if Grandpa and Grandma chose something else. That's on them. I nodded. I think I need my own lawyer, someone who doesn't drink coffee with your grandfather every week. Ben gave me a small, sad smile. Jared said he knows a lawyer who does estate and tech contracts. You want me to text him? I looked up at the ceiling and took a deep breath, like I was about to dive into cold water. Yeah, let's meet her. I don't know how far I'll go, but if I never take a step, I'll spend the rest of my life asking, what if I'd done something? Her name was Harper. Her office was in an old brick building in the nearest small city. It wasn't a shiny high-rise. It was a 2-story place with a wooden staircase and the smell of coffee and fresh paper. I brought the hard drive, the iPad, Ethan's old will, the life insurance policy, everything I thought might matter. Harper was in her early 40s, hair pulled back, sharp eyes, soft voice. She shook my hand, asked a few gentle questions, then said, "Start from the beginning. Take your time. I'm not in a rush." I told her everything. Ethan, the project, the late nights, the promises about the payout, the stroke, the funeral, the laptop in the trash, Collins, the "you have enough already" speech. Finally, I pushed the hard drive and iPad toward her like sliding my last cards across the table. She plugged in the drive, opened file after file, her eyes flicking quickly, sometimes jotting notes in a small notebook. Every now and then she frowned. Every now and then she nodded to herself. After a while she leaned back and looked at me. First, she said, I want to say your husband was smart. He wasn't just fantasizing. The memo, the emails, the contract, they all show very clearly what he intended. His share of this project, if it existed, was for you and your son. You didn't make that up. My eyes stung again. Second, Harper continued, your in-laws forming an LLC, taking the payout into that LLC, declaring themselves the only ones handling his estate and leaving you in the dark. That's not some fuzzy grey area like Mr. Collins implied. Under civil law, that's a form of conversion, wrongfully taking control of property that belongs to someone else. A lot of states call that exactly what it is. Civil theft. I swallowed. Theft. Like stealing. The word felt heavy and somehow exactly right. Mrs. Parker, Harper said gently, this isn't about whether a widow should get a bit more money. This is about a man who took steps to tie his work to his wife and son, and other people inserting themselves to redirect the flow of that money. So, what do I do? I asked. The question isn't, what must you do? She said. The question is, what do you want? Do you want every dollar, some of it, an apology, a court ruling that records the truth, all of the above? I looked at my hands, the blue veins, the cracked skin from hot dishwater. I thought about Ben, the house, and Ethan. I thought about the whispers that would come. She dragged her in-laws into court for money. I said slowly, I want my son to grow up not thinking his father abandoned him. I want, if people talk about this project in 50 years, for them not to say it was worthless, and his parents nobly sacrificed it. I want Ethan's name attached to the truth. And yes, we need the money, but that's not the only reason. Harper nodded. That's the best answer I've heard in a long time. If you agree, I'll represent you and Ben. First, we'll send a letter asking for statements, contracts, and an explanation. If they cooperate, we might settle out of court. If not, then we file a lawsuit. But unlike Collins, I won't tell you to just trust your husband's family. You'll see every document. You see, for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was standing on my side of the line. But I have to be honest, Harper added. They're going to be very angry. They'll call you a traitor, a divider. They'll use their age and health to turn it into a story about ungrateful younger people attacking them. Can you handle that? I thought for a long moment, then nodded. I've spent 20 years being treated as invisible in my husband's business. I think I can handle being called a traitor for a while, if it means at the end, the paper tells the truth. Harper's letter to my in-laws was short, cold, and nothing like our family conversations. She requested bank statements for Parker and Son Consulting LLC from 6 months before Ethan's death to the present. The full acquisition contract with Millstone Systems, documentation of any loan Ethan supposedly owed Robert, with signatures or receipts. An explanation of why I was never informed or asked to sign anything related to the payout, given the existence of the partnership declaration memo. She attached a partial copy of that memo and a snippet of the emails, redacted where needed. It took about 2 days for my phone to start ringing off the hook. Laura! Margaret's voice cracked on the phone. What are you doing? Sending a lawyer after us? Are you trying to kill us before we set foot in a nursing home? I didn't send a lawyer after you, I said quietly. I hired a lawyer to ask the questions I can't ask without being shut down. What do you want? Money? She snapped. Fine, if you're that desperate, we'll send you a few thousand, but you don't have to turn us into criminals over some silly project. No, I said, my voice suddenly very steady. I want the truth, and I want Ethan's share where it belongs. The court can decide how much that is. I'm not bargaining with a few thousand for peace. She burst into tears, then into accusations. I listened, her calling me harsh, saying I'd poisoned Ben against his grandparents, saying I didn't value how hard they'd worked to raise a son for me to marry. I let her get it all out. Then I said one thing. You can keep your feelings, Mum. I'll keep my documents. The rest is up to the court. They refused to provide the documents voluntarily. All communication went through their lawyer, either Collins or someone he brought in. Every letter was carefully worded. Dodging and deflecting, Harper skimmed the responses and shook her head. "All right, they've chosen their path, we'll file." The morning of the hearing was crisp and chilly. I wore Ethan's favourite dark blue sweater and a wool scarf Margaret had knitted for me many years ago. I wasn't sure if I should take it off. In the end, I kept it on, like a reminder to myself that nothing in this story was pure black and white. The courtroom was small, with wood panelling and that faint smell of paper and old upholstery. People sat on the benches with their own family battles in their laps. I was just one more widow in the crowd, sitting between my teenage son and a nervous IT guy. When Robert and Margaret walked in, my heart jumped. They looked older than the last time I'd seen them. Maybe it was the lighting or the weight of it all. Robert leaned on a cane. Margaret clung to his arm and kept her eyes away from me. They sat on the other side with their lawyer. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, silver hair, thin glasses, a voice that wasn't loud but carried. I didn't know how many inheritance fights she'd seen, but when her eyes fell on me, there was something like understanding there. The first part of the hearing went exactly how Harper predicted. Their lawyer talked about father-son consulting, about old loans Robert had extended to Ethan, about how I was already provided for via life insurance, and the house he painted, the laptop in the trash story, as a loving mother-in-law helping a grieving widow let go of work obsessions. Everything was framed as noble sacrifice and misunderstood intentions. Then it was Harper's turn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She simply walked the judge through the contract, the clause stating Ethan's estate was the beneficiary, the memo naming me as partner, and the emails showing Ethan trying to protect me and Ben. She called Jared to the stand. He told them about the backup, the passphrase only I knew, the instructions Ethan gave him. If anything happens to me, Laura's the one I trust, not my parents. Ban sasoy, osime taise. Harper showed the email where Robert told Millstone this was a father-son consulting matter and that I was taken care of through insurance. She asked Robert point blank if he'd ever told Millstone I existed as more than an afterthought. He dodged, claimed he couldn't remember every detail, but the words were there, in black and white. She asked Margaret about the laptop. Margaret cried and said she only wanted me to stop torturing myself. But when Harper read Ben's statement, she said the project was silly and had no value. Margaret's face hardened for a moment, and the real woman I knew peeked through. When the judge finally spoke, the room went so quiet I could hear the air vent humming. She looked over the stack of papers, then at us. "I've reviewed the contracts, memos, emails, and testimony from both sides," she said slowly. "I see a man, Ethan Parker, who took concrete steps to tie the fruits of his labour to his wife and son. I see parents who may have felt entitled, as parents do, but who also made deliberate choices, forming an LLC, taking the payout into that account, presenting themselves as the sole representatives of his estate, and keeping his widow in the dark." She paused and looked straight at Robert and Margaret. "This is not merely a family misunderstanding," she said. "This is wrongful control over assets that clearly belong to Ethan Parker's estate. The court will call it what it is, theft." That word seemed to hang in the air. Margaret broke down sobbing. Robert's knuckles went white on the arm of his chair. "The court orders," she continued, "that the full payout from Millstone Systems tied to Ethan Parker's share, whether still held or already spent, be returned to his estate. From there, it will be distributed under state inheritance law, meaning his wife and son are the rightful primary beneficiaries. Parker and Son Consulting LLC will also pay civil damages for conversion." Then she looked at me. "Mrs. Parker, this judgment won't heal all the wounds in your family, but it does restore the truth about your husband's intentions." I didn't cry. Strangely, I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt something heavy slide off my chest. I squeezed Ben's hand. His eyes were red, but he looked lighter. Outside the courtroom, we waited on an old wooden bench while Harper wrapped up paperwork. No one said much. There was just the sound of footsteps and the clunk of the vending machine. Robert and Margaret came out eventually and stopped a few steps away from us. Margaret spoke first. "Happy now?" she rasped. "The court called us thieves. What do you think this town will say about us?" I looked at her and remembered 100 dinners she'd cooked, scarves she'd knitted, the times she told me to make sure Ethan wore a hat in the cold. I also remembered worthless project, the laptop in the trash, and the email where she and her husband reduced me to taken care of already. "I didn't tell the court what words to use," I said quietly. "They looked at the documents and chose their own label. I'm not celebrating that word. It hurts me too. But I also know that if we didn't have this written down somewhere, people would tell a different story, that you protected the family honor, gave up some worthless money, and I was the greedy one." Robert looked tired more than angry now, like someone had carved a line down the middle of his pride. "I raised him from the time he couldn't stand up," he said hoarsely. "You came later. Now you get to decide what he wanted after he's dead. You don't see anything backwards about that?" I took a breath. "I'm not deciding for Ethan. He already decided. He wrote it, emailed it, signed it. I just asked the court to read what he'd already said. If you're angry, you can be angry at him for calling me his partner in the first place, but I think deep down, this is what he wanted." Ben stepped forward and stood beside me. He looked his grandfather in the eye and, despite the tremor in his voice, spoke clearly. "Grandpa, I'm still your grandson. I still love you both. But I can't pretend taking my dad's share and hiding it from us was for my own good. I can read. I heard the lawyers I know Dad didn't leave us out." Margaret turned away, tears streaming again. "One day, when we're gone, you'll regret putting us through this," she said, then took Robert's arm and walked away. I didn't answer. Maybe one day I will regret parts of this. Maybe I won't. Right then, the thing I felt most strongly was calm. Life after the judgment didn't turn into some fairy tale. The payout came back into Ethan's estate. Isansi adjusted for taxes, lawyer fees, and damages. I didn't end up rich. But I paid off the mortgage. I opened a college fund for Ben that meant he wouldn't have to drown in loans. I set aside a small amount to create a tiny scholarship at the local community college for an IT student in need called the Ethan and Laura Parker Scholarship. Every time a thank you letter showed up in my mailbox from a student I'd never met, I'd smile, look up at Ethan's photo on the wall and say, "See, your worthless project is still paying bills." My relationship with my in-laws settled into an uneasy distance. They didn't go to jail. This was civil court, not criminal. But the financial hit forced them to sell the big RV they used to brag about taking around the country. They moved into a smaller house. Word got around, because word always does in small towns. In their version of the story, I was the greedy daughter-in-law who dragged them into court. Ben still visits them sometimes. He hears their side, about their age, their health, their sacrifices. I never forbid him from going. I just tell him, "Listen, be respectful, but you're allowed to keep your own mind. You don't have to argue. Just remember what your dad wrote." Sometimes at night, I sit alone in the living room and think about that little hard drive in the desk drawer. Next to it is a printed copy of the Partnership Declaration, slipped into a plastic sleeve, along with Ben's birth certificate and our marriage license. One stormy night, I took out a pen and wrote a letter I never meant to send. At the top, I wrote, "To Ethan, and to myself if I'm reading this someday. Tonight," I wrote, "I'm sitting in the kitchen where you used to type until 2 in the morning. There's no sound of keys anymore. I did something I never thought I'd do. I took your parents to court. There are days I feel like the bitter woman from TV dramas your mother always complained about. But I also know if I'd stayed silent, if I'd let people call your work worthless and let others cash it in for themselves, I'd have lost the only thing I still have, my ability to look in the mirror and say, I tried to protect what he built. I don't know if I made every step perfectly. I just know when the judge called it theft. I didn't feel glee. I felt sad. Because I know nobody wants that word next to their name, especially at their age. But some things need to be called what they are, or they keep happening again and again. You once called me your partner, not just in that memo. I used that title one last time to stand up. If someday I'm old and my hands shake too much to hold a pen, I hope Ben reads these papers and this letter and understands. Standing up for what's right doesn't always mean you hate the people on the other side. Sometimes it's the only way to hang on to the part of a person you loved in the middle of all the noise about family, honor, and being practical. I folded the letter, slipped it in with the memo, and closed the drawer. Then I turned off the kitchen light, leaving just one small lamp over the sink, exactly the way Ethan always did, saying there should always be a little light on in this house. The next day, Jared dropped by with a bag of freshly roasted coffee. He sat at the table and told me about the new projects at work, how every time they finish a stable build, he hears Ethan in his head saying, "Run the backup before you celebrate." "You know," Jared said, "everyone at the company knows the rough outline of what happened, not the details, but enough." The general feeling is Ethan chose the right person to trust. Some men hide everything from their wives. He didn't. He copied his whole world onto a little hard drive and wrote your name on it. I laughed softly. "He was still a little silly," I said, thinking I could understand all his tech contracts. "Maybe you don't understand code," Jared replied, "but you understand people. That's probably why he called you his partner." At night, when the house is quiet and the fridge hums, I sometimes open that desk drawer just to look at the keyring, the hard drive, the stack of documents. I think about all the women I know over 50, scattered across this country, worrying about bills, wondering what their husbands are really doing on their computers, feeling stupid in front of lawyers, banks, and tech companies. If I could talk to them all at once, here's what I'd say. Asking one more question doesn't make you a bad person. Having someone read a contract with you doesn't make you greedy. Keeping a copy, a backup, doesn't mean you don't trust your family. It means you respect the life you helped build. I don't know what will happen when Robert and Margaret get even older, sicker, more fragile. Maybe one day I'll show up at their door with a pot of soup again. Maybe I won't. That part of the story is still unwritten, but I do know this. If I'd stayed silent and let them throw that backup and memo away, right along with the laptop, I would have let them rewrite Ethan's story in their words. At 58, in a small windy town with old wooden porches, maybe the last kind of freedom I've got left is the right to say, no, that's not how it happened. And sometimes, for a woman like me, that's enough to sleep a little better at night.